talk to you about Sappho, a tragedy in 5 acts. And I'm going to be talking for about 10 minutes, so you guys can come. And the first thing I would like to do before I dive in is to get a sense from you kind of where we're starting with this person. So if you have heard of Sappho before, would you please just make the sound and nod your head? Okay, good. So we're starting with some groundwork here. We have some expectations that we are going to address a little bit. If you wouldn't mind, think of one word that you think of when you think of Sappho, something that describes her or something she does or whatever. So if you would just shout it out on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Passion.
Okay, great. Good. If you heard something that you liked, or you can think of another word that describes Sappho, shout it out on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Rhythm.
Interesting. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I think some of the words that we heard are basically where we're starting as a contemporary audience with Sappho. We have some preconceived notions about her, some ideas about her, some of which may be true, some of which may not be true, and we're going to look at some of those, and also then get into a little bit of the writer and her perspective on Sappho. So if you've never heard of Sappho before, lucky you. This is a nice way to meet her. She was a poet in ancient Greece, very famous and popular. She reached the height of her popularity around 600 BC, and she, we don't have a lot of her work still. So what we have left is 1 complete poem and 250 fragments. Now those fragments can be as long as what seems like a poem to us or as short as 1 word. So we don't have a great big body of work to draw on, which allows, I think, a contemporary audience or audiences throughout the ages to project a lot of interesting things on our Sappho. So Sappho tended to write about a lot of things, but one of the things that she wrote about was a desire for women. There's an eroticism in her poems for women like Anactoria, Ganglia, and Atthis. And that is where we get the words sapphic and lesbian. Both of those words come from Sappho. They are from our idea of Sappho as a lesbian and as a sapphic person. So for us, let's hear actually some of her poems. I'd love to hear just the poem for Ganglia number 1. Where are you? Would you mind just reading a couple of stanzas?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sappho's poem for Ganglia. Like the breath of morning or a breeze from the sea, fresh thy beauty smote me, virile of the north, startled by thy vision, transports half divine, flooded veins and bosom, shook me with desire.
And could we hear from the one for Anactoria as well?
Since young brides have hearts that can be persuaded easily, like things palpitant to passion as am I, remembering Anactoria who has gone from me, and whose lovely walk and the shining pallor of her face I would rather see before my eyes than Lydia's chariots in all their glory armored for battle.
Thank you. So I just wanted to put a little bit of her actual poems in the room. We won't get to hear them in the play, so we have a sense of where she started and what her poetry was like, of course in English translation. So for a contemporary audience, it feels like a no-brainer that Sappho was probably a lesbian. But throughout time, there have been many other interpretations of her and views of her. There is a kind of effect where, since she was the only woman in a field of men, literally the only poet that we remember and know that is a woman, there is a tendency to kind of project a lot of stuff about her. 1, and 2, particularly about her sexuality. So even if you were like the only female plumber in a room full of plumbers, probably people would have a lot of theories about your sexuality. And it's just kind of the thing that happens, right? So Sappho has throughout the ages been called an oversexed predator of men, a slut, a prostitute, an overly dramatic cougar kind of characterization. There's also a characterization that Ovid gave us. He wrote about Sappho. And his story, she falls in love with a ferryman, an old ferryman, who's had his face transformed to a young ferryman by the goddess of love, Venus, who's given him a magical ointment. So obviously that's the true one. So I want to talk specifically about Stella's Sappho, and Stella is the playwright that we are looking at this evening. She went by many other names. I'm going to go with Stella because it's shorter, and it's also the one that she kind of ended up with. And she was an American poet of some renown. She had a kind of great reputation. People knew about her. She got great press. And this play was written in the late Victorian age, so 1868. And her particular Sappho, we'll get into that. She was once called the rival of Sappho by Edgar Allan Poe. So I think she had a particular identification with Sappho, that she felt connected to her. She felt that they had a lot in common. And some of the ways that she felt connected to her, I think, come through in the play. So let's look at a couple of those so that you can, chart them as you watch these glorious people do their thing this evening. So the first thing is both Stella and Sappho were poets. And they were both poets who were famous in their lifetimes. So they both achieved success and renown during the time that they were alive. Sappho in the play has a dead husband. Stella was divorced acrimoniously, so I presume she probably wished her husband was dead. There's another little tiny Easter egg that I just want to point out to you that happens kind of in the course of this play that's an overlap between Stella and Sappho. And that is, in Stella's life, she received all this great praise from Edgar Allan Poe, but there was a little bit of controversy around that praise. And actually, let's hear some of the praise first. And I have number 3. This is something that Edgar Allan Poe said about Stella.
The poems of Mrs. Lewis generally are distinguished by a fluent abandon of style and thought, throughout all which the strictest precision of language is preserved. She is quite accomplished, a good classical scholar, young and beautiful in face and form.
So she got a lot of raves from Edgar Allan Poe, and there is also, the controversy is that she paid for it. That her husband, Mr. Lewis, Sylvanus D. Lewis, paid Edgar Allan Poe $100 to talk up his wife. So there was a kind of recorded conversation that Edgar Allan Poe had with a friend, I believe. So we have that here. So this is not a direct quote from Edgar Allan Poe, but it is said he said this. So let's hear number 4, please.
A literary critic must be loath to violate his taste, his sense of the fit and the beautiful. To sin against these and praise an unworthy author is to him an unpardonable sin. But if he were placed on the rack, or if one he loved better than his own life were writhing there, I can conceive of his forging a note against the bank of fame, in favor of some would-be poetess, who is able and willing to buy his poems and opinions.
So, we don't know, right? We have a Poe museum, we don't have a Stella museum. It's biased, obviously, for Edgar Allan Poe. But so in the play, listen for a little moment where Sappho is accused of something similar. It happens towards the beginning, so check it out. I think ultimately, though, this play is best read as a kind of Victorian poet's fantasy. It's this particular woman's, perhaps, and maybe all of us, dream come true. A lot of great things happen in this play. The main character is surrounded by poets and politicians who are all mad with love for her. The poet is crowned the best poet of all the poets. There's that dead husband, Ultimately, I think it's a heterosexual poetess's dream come true, this play, aside from the tragedy part, which, we'll get to. A couple of things before we start. Just to note, most of this play is written in iambic pentameter, so these folks have been rehearsing kind of with the idea of working a little bit like they're working on a play by William Shakespeare. You'll also hear some, for you verse nerds out there, there's some tetrameter, some tetrameter in the play as well, so enjoy. one other thing to note, you're going to hear the word lesbian a lot in this play, and it does not mean what you think it means in this play. So in 1868, lesbian was not yet in use in the way that we use it. It was not for another 25 years before the word lesbian started to mean the love of women. At the time, it just meant someone from Lesbos. So in the way that I am from Virginia and I'm a Virginian, someone from Lesbos is a lesbian. And you're going to hear it a lot, and you just want to get used to it. That's all I'm going to say. If it rings a little bell, let the bell ring and move on. I just wanted to point out one other thing before we dive in, and that is kind of what I admire most about this play, which is that it is refreshingly immodest and full of naked ambition. This character wants things, she desires them, she goes after them, she's fierce. And this is at a time that in 1868, we're talking late Victorian period, and that is a time where the ideal woman was the angel in the house. That is the woman who is shy and retiring, who gives of herself to everyone in the house, who is devoted, you know what I'm saying. So this character is like the opposite of what every woman should be in this period. So it is quite innovative in that point. And in fact, I feel like there's something about this character's ambition that is even unusual for today. So enjoy that. Also enjoy the kind of naked desire that this character has. And I think that's something that she shares with Sappho as well. So enjoy all of those things. Have a great time. Enjoy the reading.